everyone, and welcome to the laythrom channel. In our videos, we cover filming tips, tricks, and techniques, equipment and product reviews, and many other things that will help you in the world of filmmaking and photography. Check out our videos and don't forget to subscribe.
Hello, what's up everybody? Welcome to the laythrom channel. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Matt, and today we're going to be rocking out a little bit an old school vibe and feeling here with V-Ray. Main principle of this is to get a good V-Ray texture scheme, get something that's really close to photorealistic with the V-Ray renderer inside 3ds Max. Now, before you could see we have a BMW M3, with no textures on it. It's all gray, plain Jane. And what we're going to do here is we're going to give it an old school vibe, kind of like what you see in this picture. A little bit of, desaturated colors, maybe some, some rust here and there. Give it a little bit of wear, give it some texture to it, maybe give it a little bit of some pastel color, stuff like that. So we're going to pull this off to my other monitor, just keep it up, as a reference. You can bring up anything you want for a reference, it's all up to you, but I'm going to give you the basic principles here. Now, before we get started, like I said, we're going to be messing with the V-Ray plugin and 3ds Max. So, obviously, two of your prereqs are you have to have 3ds Max and you have to have the V-Ray plugin. This particular variant is 3ds Max 2014, which in a 64-bit format. And right now, we're going to go in and open up my render setup. I already have it set up to V-Ray, but if for some reason you do not know how to assign your renderer, you obviously just go to the assigned renderer in your render setup. Click these little three dots to choose your renderer, and right now I have the V-Ray Advanced 3.00.08 selected. So as of right now, I'm going to close that bad boy down, and actually, you know what, real quick, I'm going to pull it up here. And I'm going to go over a couple of these settings with you guys, just for those of you who may be starting out. I know this is kind of one of those videos that you should be essentially somewhat familiar with 3D programs in general. You should have an idea of what to do and all that other good stuff, but I'll try and break it down even for those of you out there who are maybe just getting into it. Maybe you want to play with a little VFX for film, or if you just want to do animation, you want something that's photorealistic, you want to make images and things like that. So here right now I'm just going to pick a single output. We're not doing any animation or anything like that. I'm going to render a view. We'll get into the whole rendering a region here in the here later on in the video. That's basically just taking a small portion of the overall image. I have it output as an HD TV 1280 by 720. I have my options for atmospherics, effects, displacement, and force two-sided all checked. I'm also using advanced lighting. This is basically everything on this first tab, with exception of your output size should be default. When I go into the V-Ray tab here, we have some other options. Now, as of right now, you can see that I have my image filter set up as a V-Ray Lanxos filter. I'm pretty sure I butchered that name, but that's just a personal preference. I suggest you go through, experiment a little bit, play with some of these settings, because just because I have a setting set up doesn't mean you're going to get the look that you want. My suggestion is to go play with these settings and maybe a couple primitive objects, see what you're getting, and go from there. Right now I have the Adaptive image sampler set from 1 to 4. I'm going to jack this up to 2 and 8. Basically, ooh, not that value. Basically jack it up a little bit. I'm going to leave my global DMC alone for right now. I'm going to leave environment, color mapping, and camera all alone for the moment being. In the GI, we have primary engine of iridescence map and a secondary engine of brute force. Now I'm going to leave these both alone because although they don't give you the greatest quality right up front and out of the box, they are some of the quickest settings. Now I am going to turn on my ambient occlusion. All I did was click the advanced button in global illumination. I'm going to go down to ambient occlusion and I'm going to jack the subdivs up to about 16. I'm basically just going to double that. I'm going to leave my radius and my occlusion setting alone. I'm going to expand both the brute force and the iridescent map drop downs. Right now its current preset is high. I'm going to hit basic and turn that into advanced. Just go through some of these settings here. Most of them can be left alone as defaults. I might play with the subdivs and the inner samples later, but for right now we're just going to leave that at 50 and 20. In brute force, I'm going to jack this up just a little bit here. We're going to go with 12 subdivs and maybe 6 bounces. Actually, 6 bounces might be too much. We're going to go with just 4. I'm going to leave caustics alone for right now. I don't want that on, mainly because it's going to slow down any render that you do. That is essentially when you want your final render, you have everything set up. Then you can start playing with your caustic settings, but for now I'm going to leave that alone. In my settings, I have my bucket width set to 12 and the sequence set up to a Hilbert curve. And I'm pretty sure that the rest of... You know what? I'm going to turn my timestamp on. That way I have a render time. And I'm going to check this in laythrom media. And I'm just going to center that. But either way, basically, if you want to somewhat speed up some of your render for preview, I would go with a smaller bucket size. I think it defaults to like 48 or something along those lines. But if you want to kind of just speed up what you're able to see, then go with a smaller bucket size. And of course, we also have render elements. Now, what I'm going to tell you to do is pretty much for your own learning curve reasons. Now, you don't have to do this. I prefer to do this either way, but I guess to each their own. I'm going to tell you to do this mainly so you can understand what is going on in the picture and what each different pass or layer is doing in the background to give you your composite shot. So I'm going to turn on V-Ray Alpha. I'm also going to turn on the V-Ray background. V-Ray bump normals. V-Ray diffuse filter. Global illumination. Illuminance. Lighting. Matte shadow. Let's see. Reflect glossiness. Highlight glossiness. Refract glossiness. Normals. Raw global illumination. Raw shadow. My raw reflection and refractions. Where's my refraction? There we go. I'm also going to turn on, let's see, our V-Ray shadows, our V-Ray specular. And I believe that might be about it. Alright. You know what, I'm going to turn on Z-Depth just in case. Now, for the sake of argument here, I'm going to just drag this off to the other side. And real quick in this scene, I'm going to set up a quick light so I can show you what those different render elements are doing. Just get up. That is not what I wanted to move. Pull this up here. And it looks like complete ass, but you know what? For the sake of this little argument here, it doesn't matter. I'm not trying to make it look beautiful. So, I'm going to pull this up. Gonna pause the recording real quick so you don't sit here and have to watch it render. And I'm just gonna kick out a quick render. Now, as you can see straight out of the box, our render settings aren't looking that bad. I mean, it did take about a minute, 30 seconds to render out, but it's not horrible. And if we drop down this little drop down box here, we can see we have multiple different options. These are all the options that are the render elements that we ended up picking and choosing. Now, this will give you a lot of good ideas of what's going on in your scene. This is why I say to pick all of those different options. And if we go up right here, we're starting at the beginning. This is the RGB color. This is your composite shot. First one down is our alpha shot, which is showing everything that is our alpha in black. Everything in white is our scene. If we go to the background, it's actually completely the opposite. The V-Ray background is white and everything in our scene is black. We also have the V-Ray bump normals. It's showing you where there's texture down to the diffuse filter. Since the vehicle is white, you know, there's no material applied to it. This is actually not showing you a lot at the moment, but later on we'll be able to use this to more of an advantage. Our GI, or global illumination, is kind of showing you a little bit, but not a whole lot at this moment. We also have the illuminance, which is showing you where your light's kind of falling. Same with your V-Ray lighting. You can actually see where some of the your highlights are and where some of your shadows are starting to pick up. You also see in the matte shadow feature, you have a lot of different shadows that are coming into play. Everything in white is basically where there's a bit of a shadow falling in at. There's no reflection, so a lot of this is going to be white. We also have another normal raw global illumination. It's basically the same as some of the other stuff. Here's your shadow. It's basically, our raw shadow. It's a little bit fine-tuned, but not too dissimilar to your matte shadow. There is no reflections. We have our V-Ray shadows, which is, as you can tell, a little bit similar to our raw shadow. And our Z depth, which is not really helping us at the moment. Neither is our specular, because like I said, nothing is applied to it. But I suggest putting those elements, adding those elements into your render, mainly because then you have the ability to kind of fine-tune this later on as we are progressing more and more. So for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and can that. I'm going to can this window right here. And I'm going to move our render setup back over and close it out. Now, I will forewarn you, I forgot to mention it earlier on in the video. Unfortunately, I am going to have to chop this video up. I do not want you guys sitting here for hours on end, because this is not exactly something that is quick and easy to blow right through. I don't want to overwhelm you with information at the same time. So, I am going to have this divided up into multiple different little videos, about a half hour long maybe. And if you're looking at the time bar now, we're almost 15 minutes in, so without further ado, let's get this started. Now, if I pull back over our reference video, you can see a few things that's going on here. I mean, we do have a lot of opaque color in this scene, or more of a like a pastel. But you also have a lot of different things here, such as some of your reflections and your speculars that are coming in. You also have a lot of texture. Granted, yes, I understand this is rust, but even some of your rusty areas have a specular fall off. It has a little bit of a highlight to it. So this is all stuff that you're going to have to keep in mind whenever you're laying out your materials and applying it to your model. This is essentially something that we want to kind of go after. In all honesty, I'm not going to sit here and try and make it a perfect 100%, true to it. This is just something that I'm kind of using as a basis to make, or a reference to make my own thing. And that's essentially how you should be using a reference. But we are looking at some, we have some areas that look rather flat and dull, and then we have some areas that have a nice highlight on it. You don't really see a whole lot of reflection per se. I mean, you still have more specular than anything. You have highlights here and there, but with the exception of the rims in this picture, you don't really have a whole lot of reflection. Maybe in the mirror, obviously, in the glass, and also on some of these chrome bits. So we're going to try and keep that in mind whenever we're opening up our materials and making them. So right now I have this one is just a copy of this one. You could ignore that. But essentially what we have here is we have two different materials. I just have the checkers that's on the floor here, and I have a straight white diffuse that I applied to the vehicle. So let's get this thing started. So first things first, I'm going to come down here, pick one of my empty material slots, go into here, pick a V-Ray material, and then name this as, I guess would that be a teal, or we'll just call it green. We're going to call this green base coat. And I will tell you right now, it is pretty imperative that you name everything. I mean, don't just leave it as, default, 14 default, 15 default. No, go through, take a couple seconds, and name everything. Makes your life so much simpler down the line. After you've went through and you renamed it, we're going to try and pick up a little bit here on that color. And I really have to stop closing this. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually cheat here a little bit. And try and get us in the ballpark. Let's pull down on my red a little bit. Maybe get a little... And you know what? For our first little go around, that should be perfectly fine. We just assigned it a nice diffuse color. Now I will also bring up with this, you can't exactly just go in and open this image in Photoshop and try and pick a color and consider that a raw color. It won't exactly work like that, because you don't have a good, you don't have a good sample of the raw color. There's too much stuff going on. You have multiple different passes. You have multiple different ways that the light is hitting it. And if anybody, if you know anybody in the paint industry, it is very easy to find out the hard way that just because something looks a certain way or a certain color at one angle, at another angle it looks a little bit different. The lighting makes it look different. So you could use the little eyedropper pick whip and get yourself, I guess you would say, kind of a starting point, and then just modify and tweak it from there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just apply some of this to our body. I honestly think that this would be the first time I've seen an M3 this color. Don't know if I'd like to see it this color in real life or not, but you know what, for the sake of this little video, I'm sure that nobody's going to throw that much of a stink. Of course, this is going up on YouTube, so who knows. So I'm going to do a quick render of this bad boy, and I'll be back with you as soon as it's done. Now, as you can see, this is one of the reasons why I said you can't just pick whip your colors, because as you can see here, we are talking a very, very light color, and which brings up something that you guys need to take into consideration here, is whenever you're doing something like this, you are going to have to run a little bit darker and a little bit more saturated. It may be one of those things that seems like a pain in the butt, but when you come down to, when it all boils down to it, you're going to have to run a little bit darker with a little bit more saturation in order to get something close to what you're originally going for. I mean, just something like the parameter that I had changed right there has done a fairly good job, you know, bringing that color more close to what we're trying to work with here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this video again on my side, render out the entire thing, and you can see what's kind of going on here. Alright, now after I've made some changes, this is essentially what we're looking at here, other than it being an ugly color. As you can see, I've had to go through and add a little bit more saturation and darken it just a little bit, even compared to when before I even went through and paused the video. Now that we're starting to get a little bit of the color that we want, we can move on and try and get some of this other stuff into play. Alright, what we're going to do here is we're going to try and dial in some of our reflections now. So what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck the Fresnel reflections and also jack our subdivs up. We're going to check those up to 90. That's a nice little base point there. And then we're also going to throw in a fall off. So let's see, where are we at? There we are. So there's a lot of settings that are involved with your fall off, and please bear with me while we go through it. And what we're going to do here is we're going to leave our fall off type as perpendicular/parallel, and we're going to leave our fall off direction alone as well. Now we're also going to come down here to the output, and we're going to click enable color map. Now another thing that's going on here is we're going to actually select the RGB value for the color map, because we are going to want to put a little bit of color into this bad boy here. Mainly because if we go back to our reference, we're not just talking about black and white. You have a little bit of color in here with your reflections. Although they are kind of subtle, you're not looking at, I mean, yes, you have a bright white hit right here, but over in here, I mean, you're looking at some very subtle but colored specularity. You're looking at a little bit of color in with your reflections. So, you know, I don't want particularly a solid black and white image here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to zoom in on this bad boy here a little bit. That's probably way too much, but render that out real quick and then we could start playing some more. Now obviously you could tell straight off the bat that this is not exactly what we're looking for. I mean, yeah, great, it would be awesome for a show car because it looks like it's been dipped in Meguiar's 20 times and buffed to a piano finish. However, this is extremely exaggerated, and we're going to have to play with these settings here and get this to line up and get what we want, because this is way too reflective and this is not exactly what we want. Not to mention, it would never look realistic. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually start out here by throwing in a nice little curve. Pull down here. Now, for those of you who are kind of wondering, I do have it just set to a Bezier, not a Bezier. I have it set to a RGB value. I'm not changing individual channels yet. It is essentially nothing more than me changing all of them at the same time. And you know what? That's a little too dark here. Let's lift this bad boy up. Maybe around there. Let's see if that'll work to what we want. Alright, and you know what? We are talking about something that's a little bit older, so let's try and move this around just a little bit more. It should be good. And as you can see, I mean, we're looking at gray to white, but we want to interject a little bit of color here. So let's start playing with this just a little bit. Now, there is a saying in the world of 3D that if you want to see how something is really applying its features, go ahead and make huge changes. That'll give you a good idea of what's being changed. Now, you don't necessarily have to. It's just one of those rules of thumb. But we have a little bit of green there, and you know what? Let me pull a little bit of blue in there as well, because we are talking about somewhat of a tealish color, not so much a straight green or straight blue. And you know what, we'll give that a shot. I'm going to render this again. By the way, if anybody from NVIDIA is watching this, and you want to kick me, well, you want to kick us a couple, you know, NVIDIA Quattro cards, or even some, you know, the Tesla, or even your nice little render box, you know, maybe even like, oh, the iRay, you know, something that helps us kick these out a little bit quicker by doing quicker reviews, that would be much appreciated, and we could work something out. You know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I would absolutely love that. But I'm going to go ahead and pause this video because it does take a little over, you know, a minute or so to render, well, actually a couple minutes to render this out, and I don't want you sitting here bored out of your mind the entire time. Okay, so, sometime later, I've tweaked some of the settings, and, well, I tweaked, come on. I've tweaked some of these curve settings. Turn those all back on. That I've also went back up to the parent and actually dropped the reflective glossiness down to 0.96. Now that's kind of giving me, if you look at the door here, that's kind of giving me more of what I want. It's got a little bit of colored reflection in it. It's got, a, you know, instead of it being just a poppy bright white, it's kind of giving me some color into the reflection, but it's also kind of blurring it out. So it's not like it's looking into a mirror. That's exactly what I want, and unfortunately you can't see it very well, but on the right side of this bumper I've went through and kind of rendered this area by itself compared to the left side of the bumper. Now the left side of the bumper, granted, I don't know if you, you know, full screen this or not, if you can notice it's a lot crisp and clear, whereas the right side of the bumper has a little bit of, you know, a dullness, or it's not as reflective. It's not mirror-like. It's got just a little bit of blur to it, and that's exactly what we're going to want for something like this, especially for a base coat. Now, from there, let's move on. Now, unfortunately, the one thing that I didn't exactly do, which is going to change a lot of the settings that I've originally done, is the BRDF, you're going to want to change it to Ward instead of Blend. Now, Ward is really good for metal materials, so it's actually really preferred compared to, say, your blends or even your fongs. So change that down to Ward, and then we're going to have to play with maybe a couple settings here. If we go through and render a small region, maybe we could see, in real time what kind of change this has made. Now, like I said, I wasn't joking. If anybody from NVIDIA is watching this, please contact me. I would love to essentially demo and utilize a much beefier card than what I'm using. Rendering at night is one thing. Rendering, on the fly whenever you're trying to teach something is completely different. Okay, and then it seems like we've lost all of our reflection. So, you know what, I'll jump this back up to 1. I believe my depth is set to 7. But I am kind of curious on why it's way too much now. So, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. You essentially have to, I'm going to stop that. You have to play with your settings just a hair here and there and see if it's pushing what you want. You don't want to go through and just say, oh, well, it's got a gloss to it, it's got a reflection, we're good to go, moving on. You have to keep in mind that your eye picks up every little subtlety. Now, this is exactly what I'm wanting for this. It's got a nice fuzzy reflection to it. It's not crisp at all. But when in all reality, I mean, if you were looking at something like this, it's not going to have a glossy reflection to it. It's not showroom quality. Well, I mean, it is in some eyes, but not, essentially what you're getting at here. So if I do another render of the half of the bumper, and I'm probably going to pause it pause the recording because we're already over a half hour, and unfortunately I haven't gotten a whole lot done because this is what you get to look forward to if you haven't started modeling or animating or anything like that. There's a lot of tweaking. I mean, anybody can put you in, the ballpark, but when it comes to getting something that you really want to make convincing, there's a lot of tweaking involved. And your eye picks up all these minute little subtleties. There's nothing in this world that is 100% pristine, except for maybe a mirror when you first get it. After that, you're always going to have little scratches, little scuffs, there's a blur here. I mean, there's nothing that is absolutely perfect, and you're essentially trying to replicate that. I mean, for all intents and purposes, look at the Iron Man suit from Iron Man. Let me turn this off real quick before I start. Yeah, as you can see here, I mean, we have a real sharp over here, and we have a nice dull reflection over here, and also in the door, and that's exactly what we want. But like I was saying, if you look at, and I really, really hope I don't get a copyright dig on this, but, I bring up the Iron Man suit mainly because the suit was almost entirely done in VFX. He wasn't wearing the suit. They found that out real quick in the first movie, that it was too cumbersome and too much of a pain in the ass. So if you come in and you start looking, I mean, granted, this nice close-up, you might be looking at the real deal, but either way, you have grunge in here. You have little wear marks, you have nicks and scratches, you have dust and a little bit of corrosion. It's just something that your eye automatically picks up. If you're looking at an image and it doesn't have any of this, it automatically looks fake. I hate to say it like that, but it kind of does. So you have to add all these little subtle details into it. Now, what we're going to do here now is we're actually going to create a blend material. So, we're going to go ahead and click on the V-Ray material, V-Ray blend material, hit OK, keep old material as submaterial, and that's what you want. What we're going to do is we're going to layer this up a little bit and try and make something that looks real nice, and I don't want to say clean because the image isn't clean, but you'll see what I'm getting at here in a minute. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here in I have my base material, which is the green base coat, and I have coat materials and blend amounts, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag those down. I'm going to make them copies. make sure that's a copy. So I'll have 2 coat materials, green base coat in slot 1 and 2. And like I said earlier, you're going to want to go through and hit the naming convention. So we have green base coat, we'll say green coat 1. If I go back up, this one's going to be green coat 2. So if we go up to our parent, now you see our green base coat is this bad boy right here, and then under that green base coat we have 2 copies, which is a green coat 1 and a green coat 2. Like I said, you're going to want to rename everything. Do not forget to rename your stuff. Make sure you have a nice convention there. Now from here, what we're going to want to do is I'm going to go into my base material. I'm going to right click, copy our reflection from our base coat, go into each of our different coats, our coat 1 and coat 2, and I'm going to paste this as an instance. Now, what's the whole reason of this? Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to come in and start playing with these reflective glossiness. Now, this one I'm going to actually bring down to probably a 0.98. I mean, we're not talking a whole lot of difference in this one. Unfortunately, I wish there was a little bit more of a spread, but we want to try and get a little bit of a multi-level reflection going on here. So what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to pause the video, do a quick render, and see what we have. Now, for those of you who are just getting started out in this field, maybe, you want to do photorealistic rendering of products or what have you. You want to get into VFX, you want to get into animation or just modeling or whatever you're trying to get into. I want you to take a look and keep an eye down here at the render time. Now, when I first started out and this entire vehicle was white, and I had no textures, no reflections, nothing on it, it took, I think, 1 minute and 30 seconds, if memory serves me correctly, to completely render out this scene. The entire scene. Now, this last render that I performed is just inside this red binding box, which is this area on the front of the vehicle, and we're up to 4 minutes and 17 seconds. So keep in mind, you're going to want to try and do this on, in little patches, if you will, just picking little parts of, a vehicle and whatnot, or whatever you're modeling. You're going to want to do little sections to give you an idea of what's going on, because if I were to sit here and do this, render this entire frame all over again, who knows what we'll be sitting at. And actually, for that sake of argument, I'm going to pause this again, just so I can do a full render and see what our time is coming out to. But I want you to keep in mind that anything that you add to it, all the stuff that you're adding, is going to jack up that render time. And also, real quick, I want to come back to some of this information that I've, was talking about earlier. First off, here's our diffusion pass. We now have color. Not a whole lot, but we have color. We also have the global illumination. We have some V-ray lighting. We have some shadows. We have some reflect glossiness. And some raw reflection. See, this is why I say that, it's kind of nice to have these different options, checked and available, because then you could see a lot of what's going on in between each different layer, if you will, of the render. But bear with me for just a quick second. It's not going to take long on your end at all, but I will be back real quick. We'll go over this full render time thing, and I'm going to end up cutting the video short in a few minutes after I get done talking about a few things, and we'll go from there. So, as you can see here, the more and more crap you add into it, the higher the render time gets. Now, down here we are looking at an entire scene render of this particular scene with just a couple blended, reflection materials and coats of paint here. We're already looking at 8 minutes and 26.8 seconds. That is nuts. Now, that's for those of you who are new to this and just getting into it and don't know that it, you don't realize that it takes as long as it does. To give you an idea, I worked on a project in the past where we were dealing with a piece of aircraft that was getting rendered out because obviously we couldn't, go down to the military and hire an Apache for 15-20 minutes. We don't have that kind of money, but I believe the aircraft was in the scene for, I want to say like maybe 10 seconds. It took almost 48 hours to render. I want to say it was like 46 hours and 20 some minutes or something to render out 10 seconds of footage that we're going to be using in a hyper realistic situation. So that's something that you're going to want to keep in mind. Now granted, this computer, it wasn't even rendered on this computer. This computer particularly is an 8-core processor overclocked at, I want to say it's 4.7 gigahertz, if memory serves me correctly, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and a 4 gig gaming style video card. Now granted, if we had more cores to utilize, maybe we had dual, 16 core processors or something like that, yes, it would definitely crunch more information. Not to mention, if you were running a, maybe a Tesla or an iRay-based machine, you get even more CUDA cores involved for the computation of pixels, and you shorten that render time dramatically. The downside with it is the price tag. Yeah, I don't have that kind of money, so I'll stick with the slow and true method, if you will, mainly because I don't want to spend that money on that. 2, I know there's a lot of people out there that are just getting into this that aren't going to spend the money on that either because it's absolutely expensive. But that's about all we have for today. We're already approaching 43 minutes into the video. I don't want to plague you with too much information all at once. I actually wanted to try and keep this at about a half hour long, and I've already overshot that by almost 15 minutes. So I'm going to cut this video short for today. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, feel free to drop them in the comment box below. Do not forget to share, like, and subscribe. I mean, seriously. Share this bad boy to anybody that you know that might be interested in something like this. Hit the thumbs up if this is helping you. I'll probably be uploading the subsequent videos here in the near future. I don't want to wait too long. Mainly because I know that some of you are going to be watching them back to back because you're trying to do that at the same time. But don't forget to subscribe, because then every time I put one of these bad boys up, you'll know about it and be able to watch it and all that other good jazz. Not to mention it helps me out as well. But for now, my name's Matt from the Laythrom channel, and thank you for watching. Hope you just see you around in the near future with, future videos. But for today, I'm out of here. I'll see you guys later.